we're going to unpack the core arguments of author Joel Richardson. We all know the story of the Exodus, right? Moses, Pharaoh, the plagues, the whole parting of the Red Sea thing. It's maybe the greatest story of liberation ever told. But what if there's more to it? What if that epic escape from Egypt wasn't just history, but was actually a kind of divine love story, one that doubles as a prophetic blueprint for the end of the world? So how do we get from a 3,000-year-old story to a prophecy about the future? Well, here's the path we're going to take. First, we'll look at the Exodus as this dramatic marriage proposal. Then, we'll see how that love story is believed to be a recurring pattern. That's going to lead us straight into a huge theological debate that's been raging for centuries. And finally, we'll explore a predicted fiery trial for Israel that leads to, well, a pretty world-changing conclusion. Okay, so let's get to the core idea from our source material. The central claim here is that the Exodus isn't just about God freeing a nation of slaves. It's way more personal than that. The whole story is framed as God, the divine bridegroom, pursuing and entering into a binding marriage covenant with his chosen bride, the nation of Israel. Now, this is where the author gets really specific, and it's pretty fascinating. They basically map the entire Exodus story onto the steps of an ancient Jewish wedding. So think about it. The incredible miracles in Egypt, that's the courtship. These grand divine gestures to win her heart. The proposal, that's at Mount Sinai, when God literally asks Israel to be his treasured possession. And the vows, the marriage contract, that's the 10 Commandments. But of course, no great love story is without its drama. The golden calf incident is framed as the first act of adultery in this new marriage. And finally, you get the renewal, with Moses basically acting as the marriage counselor, stepping in to save the whole relationship. So here's the crucial point. The author doesn't see this as just a powerful metaphor to explain something that happened a long time ago. No, they argue that this whole narrative, the courtship, the vows, the betrayal, the renewal, is a pattern. It's a template for how God is going to act again in the future. So how exactly does an ancient love story become a blueprint for what's to come? Well, according to the source, this is where history literally turns into prophecy. The argument is that the whole Exodus journey isn't just a one-time thing. It's a script that's going to be reenacted at the climax of human history, specifically during the events of the Second Coming. The author builds their case on what they call the desert prophecies. They've identified this whole family of texts, from Deuteronomy all the way to Habakkuk, that they believe paint this one consistent picture. In each of these passages, they see a divine warrior, the Messiah, marching from the south, from the direction of Sinai, literally retracing that original Exodus route to come and save his people one last time. But here's the thing. This whole idea that God has this future, very literal plan for the nation of Israel that's based on the Exodus pattern, well, it causes a massive theological collision. It runs headfirst into a viewpoint that has been dominant in Christian thought for almost 2,000 years. And that brings us to the main event, really, the great debate that sits at the very heart of the author's argument. It is a fundamental clash between two completely different ways of seeing God's relationship with Israel and the church. It's supersessionism versus restorationism. So first, let's break down supersessionism. You might have heard it called replacement theology. It's the historic, traditional view that the Christian church has superseded or replaced national Israel in God's plan. So in this way of thinking, all those promises God made to Israel in the Old Testament, they're no longer for ethnic Israel. They're now fulfilled spiritually in the church. Now the other view, the one the author holds, is restorationism, and it's a complete 180. This position argues that God's promises to the nation of Israel, we're talking literal promises of land, a king, a physical kingdom, are unconditional, and they have not been transferred to the church. They are still on the table, awaiting a literal future fulfillment for the Jewish people. So let's put these side by side, because it all boils down to one massive question. Who are God's chosen people now? Supersessionism says the church is the new Israel. The old promises get a spiritual makeover and apply to Christians. Restorationism says, not so fast. National Israel is still chosen for a unique purpose, and their very specific national promises are still waiting to be fulfilled literally. It's a fundamental fork in the theological road. Now, the author makes a very, very serious charge here. They argue that this theology of supersessionism has had devastating real-world consequences. The source directly connects this doctrine to a long, tragic history of Christian anti-Semitism. They point to examples like these: edicts from emperors forbidding Jews from even living in Jerusalem, church leaders encouraging the burning of synagogues, church councils forcing Jews to wear special badges, a practice the Nazis would later adopt, and of course, the mass expulsions of Jewish people across Europe. The argument is simple. If you teach that Israel is a rejected people, you create the theological justification for their persecution. This brings us to the climax of the author's entire prophetic framework. Because if Israel is going to be restored, the author argues the Bible predicts one last, unimaginably painful trial before their final redemption. It's a period known as the time of Jacob's trouble. The prophet Jeremiah is the one who really introduces this idea. He talks about a day of distress for Jacob, which is just another name for Israel, that is so uniquely terrible that he says there is none like it. But look closely at that last line. That's the key. But he will be saved from it. So you have to ask, what is the point of such a horrific period? Well, in this framework, it's not just random chaos. The author presents it as a kind of divine discipline, a final, intense pressure cooker event designed to do one thing: bring about the national repentance of Israel, turning the entire nation back to God right before the Messiah returns. And to really get a sense of the sheer gravity of what's being described here, the author points to an absolutely sobering prophecy in the book of Zechariah. Their interpretation, shared by many, is that 2 out of every 3 Jewish people living in the land of Israel will perish during this final tribulation. It's a staggering number that underscores the unparalleled crisis they believe is coming. But after that incredible darkness, the author's framework points to a spectacular dawn. And this brings us to our final section: the ultimate restoration of Israel and the establishment of a global messianic kingdom. The whole thing pivots on the physical, literal return of Jesus the Messiah. According to this view, he shows up at the 11th hour, at Israel's absolute darkest moment, to save the surviving remnant from being completely wiped out and to judge the nations that have come to destroy them. And according to the source, his return isn't just a last-minute rescue. It's the beginning of a whole new world order. This restored kingdom would kick off with the national salvation of all Israel. We're talking about a literal, physical, restored Jewish kingdom, with Jerusalem as the capital of the world. The Messiah would rule the entire globe from the historic throne of David. And some prophecies even describe a required annual pilgrimage for all nations to come to Jerusalem and worship the king. And this is how the author brings the whole story full circle. This final, glorious restoration of Israel is presented as the ultimate renewal of that original marriage covenant from Mount Sinai. The bride, after a long, painful history of unfaithfulness, discipline, and finally repentance, is at last fully and forever restored to her divine husband. So in the end, we're left with the one provocative question that this whole framework is built on. The author is really asking us to rethink a story we thought we knew. What if the Exodus wasn't just the beginning of one nation's story, but was actually a divinely orchestrated dress rehearsal for the entire world's story? It's a massive idea, and it definitely reframes everything.